Ladies and gentlemen, I still can't really believe the New York Islanders actually won this thing. To celebrate the Islanders winning the first overall pick in the NHL draft, we're going to be going through their first 3 picks in their first 3 rounds, seeing what their needs are for their prospect pool, as well as the players I think they're most likely to select. So who are the prospects I think make the most sense for this Islanders team in this next NHL draft, and who do I ultimately see them selecting at first overall? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through the entire Islanders prospect pool and what they could do in the future, and hit that subscribe button if you're for more draft content just like this. So much we're going to be pumping out before the draft that you won't want to miss. Now, if there was any team inside that top 11 that could have used a big push to first overall, the New York Islanders were definitely up there. I don't think they had a bad prospect pool anymore. It's been pretty improving over the past couple of years with some pretty great draft picks and guys like Quinn Finley, Cole Eisman. On the defense, players like Isaiah George, Jesse Polkinen, and on the goaltending side, some really unique prospects and projects coming up. But I don't think it was necessarily a top tier prospect pool, but now with the addition of Cal Ritchie at the trade deadline, and now this upcoming first overall pick, things are about to get interesting. I'd wager to say that after this 2025 draft, the Islanders might be in the first half of the NHL in terms of prospect pools, which I don't think in my entire time ranking those things has ever been the case, and that's pretty exciting. Now, before we go through these picks and what the targets might be for the Islanders, I also wanted to talk about what their team needs and prospect pool needs might be. But when it comes to the team needs that I think they'll really focus on, especially with their first couple of picks, the 3 ones to me are a top 6 two-way centerman. You, of course, got Cal Ritchie there already, but I think he's more of a play driver, more of a pure offensive type of guy. And unlike what Frank Cervelli says, I don't see a lot of Patrice Bergeron in his game. I'm sorry, Cal. But I think a two-way player that could be a second-line center behind Ritchie or even a first-line player ahead of him, I think would be a pretty worthy ad for them. Whether it's in this draft or the next one, I think that's something they could prioritize. I think also a top 4 pace-pushing defenseman is a necessity. Sure, you got Noah Dobson there, but his future is a little bit in flux right now. We don't know how much of a future he really has with the Islanders. His contract over the next couple seasons is going to be something to look out for, so he will be an interesting case, but I think besides that, you don't have much in the prospect pool that is pure pace progression. Jesse Polkinen does bring that, but he's very all over the place, still very raw in his game, and I don't think you could depend upon him to be a top 4 true defenseman in the NHL. Adding that as well, I think could be pretty important for this Islanders team, especially as a lot of that defense gets a lot older. Plus, I think also the third big need will be a big top 6 wing. A lot of the wingers they have coming up, players like Cole Eisman, players like Quinn Finley that I love quite a bit, they're more pure offensive players, not the biggest physical brutes in the world, not guys that are going to overpower you physically. I think for the Islanders, especially in how they built up that team year after year, this might be a team that wants to add some bulk to that prospect pool, and this draft could be a good way to do it. But let's get into that first overall pick, man, because this draft is so freaking interesting because I think it always depended on which team got first overall, which player would end up going at number 1, because it was all over the place. Especially with this draft being so close at the top, it was really going to come down to team need. But in the case of the New York Islanders, as you guys could probably tell of my top 2 needs for the prospect pool, a top 6 centerman and a top 4 pace-pushing defenseman, well, you have both of those in this draft class right up at the top, and it does not narrow down the players whatsoever. In fact, I think the Islanders are one of the few teams out there that wouldn't just have Schaefer and Misa as first overall candidates. Of course, it's been talked about a ton, but you got James Hagens as the Long Island kid, homegrown there as an Islanders fan. He is somebody that I think the Islanders will be considering, which I don't think for many other teams would have been the case. The only other teams I could have seen considering him for first overall, or maybe the Bruins, maybe the New York Rangers, but it's a pretty thin list. But I think out of every team in that top 11 that had a chance at first overall, the Islanders are certainly the most likely to end up selecting him. And even though he personally wouldn't be my pick if I'm the New York Islanders, I think he is still a worthy top 3 pick, and I don't think you can go wrong between any of these 3 guys. I think James Hagens especially has been honestly disrespected throughout a lot of this second half of the draft process. Sure, he didn't absolutely dominate his way through the NCAA this season, so I guess that's a little bit disappointing, but the bar has been so incredibly raised over just the past couple of years with players like Adam Fantilli and Macklin Celebrini. Those are truly generational NCAA type of prospects. But in the case of like a Matty Beniers, who is also a point per game on a Michigan team back in 2021, he went second overall, and there was really no questions about it. He was my number 1 back in that draft year. So I think the production, especially NCAA-wise, can greatly vary from really team to team and player to player. A lot of people will point towards the fact that he was with Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault a lot on his line throughout the course of the season, and that being a reason why his production was a little bit disappointing, and I guess so, but it just really wasn't that great of a chemistry chemistry fit, in all honesty. And there was a lot of times, especially in the second half of the season, where Ryan Leonard was at points just completely missing plays that Hagens was setting up. It was just weird, and it didn't really seem to work out for all of these players involved. It felt a lot better and a lot more natural when Hagens was actually on the second line with Teddy Stiga as his wing. So I think it was just a stylistic problem in this first year of BC, and honestly, I see Hagens exploding next year with the Eagles, especially with Perreault and Leonard gone to the NHL. Hagens is going to have all the opportunity to be the guy. And the thing was, too, when Hagens' stock was going down through the course of the second half of the season, I thought he was getting better and better. He was playing more engaged, he was getting better defensively, he was harder on pucks and actually creating more chaos with his speed and his skill, and it all started to come a lot more together for me. It still wasn't perfect, but especially compared to the first half, it was confusing to see Hagens now dropping to ranks like 6th and 7th overall when I thought he was playing some of his best hockey ever. Again, he's personally not my number one prospect in this draft class, but I think people saying he's not a top 5 prospect in this class are just being silly. I mean, so many other prospects would have such a hard time transitioning onto the NCAA. It's not an easy thing to do. I know, again, the bar has been so highly raised by Celebrini and Fantilli, but those are production lines we have never seen before these last couple of years. So I think Hagens, it's much more of a realistic stat line, and I think he's still had a solid rookie season in the NCAA, and I think the future for him and the potential is still sky high. The big reason why I don't see the Islanders ultimately taking Hagens, though, is just because of the team need, and I think what they could also use in the center position up the middle. You have, of course, Cal Ritchie as the big one, and he is a bigger center, but I don't think he really plays like one. He's much more of a power play specialist, much more of a rush creator, which is kind of what along the lines of what Hagens is already. I don't think they're going to necessarily want to go for a guy that's pure offense when they already have a guy like Cal Ritchie who can do that pretty well. So to me, even though I think Hagens will be a factor, I still think ultimately it's between Matthew Schaefer and Michael Misa. And I think personally Michael Misa is right up there. He would be my personal number 1 pick for pretty much every single team out there. Maybe besides San Jose, because I think they could use another franchise D on top of that. But I think Misa is just such a profound player in so many ways. The skill set, the maturity, and the balance he has in his game while being able to put up highlight reel goals and plays every single place on the ice. He just lifts his teammates up to such a higher level, and to me would be an excellent New York Islander. The problem is a lot of the stylistic comparisons I think are pretty apt of just like a kind of faster, more rush-based John Tavares. That's not exactly the comparison you want if you're the New York Islanders, especially as a first overall pick. I can get the trauma there. But I mean, Michael Misa is Michael Misa, and he's a transcendent type of talent. 134 points in 65 games. Personally, I think he's better than John Tavares, but that's just me. I think he just has more of a ceiling in terms of his skill and his speed, and I think that's something that will really make things interesting at that first overall spot. But I gotta be honest, looking at everything that the Islanders need, everything they covet, and I think what they would really want in this year's draft to really nail down for the future, I think for them getting a top pair defenseman is exactly what the doctor ordered, and that's why ultimately I do believe Matthew Schaefer will be the pick by the New York Islanders. It will be extremely close. I think the Islanders are going to be doing their homework on Misa and especially James Hagens as well. But at the end of the day, with how many question marks they have around Noah Dobson, if there's even a good chance he's gone in the next couple of years, what else do you have there as a pace pusher, as a transition player on the defense? You don't have much there unless Jesse Pulkkinen again absolutely explodes and is able to mature his game in just a couple of seasons. I don't know how likely that is, but if you get a player like Matthew Schaefer, who I think in a couple of seasons could be already a transcendent piece, a Calder candidate type of player, then I think for the Islanders, that's a slam dunk pick to make. One of the biggest issues the Islanders have had since their contending seasons just a few years ago has been the crippling of that defense. You have players like Noah Dobson who have their moments, but have their really down moments as well. But you have players that were really big pieces of that team, like Ryan Pulock and, of course, Scott Mayfield, and also all the uninjured players that have like Adam Pelech as well, Alexander Romanov. Romanov's been one of the few bright spots on the younger side for that Islanders defense. But besides that, it's just been all over the place. And they've had to go through waiver claims like Scott Prunovich, signing players like Tony DeAngelo to even survive. And I just don't think that's a very viable strategy long term. There were so many teams out there that I think could have used a Matthew Schaefer, but the Islanders, I think, were right at the top. This defense was crumbling in so many different ways, and it might still, even with a Schaefer type of piece, but having him, I think, as a number 1 is going to make everything a lot easier. And plus, it might make Noah Dobson's job a lot easier as well. He won't be relied upon to be the absolute #1 guy in every single situation, which I don't think he is made to be. Schaefer can come in, play the big minutes, be reliable in all situations, while putting up that kind of Roman Josi-like transition ability. Maybe not the points numbers that Josi puts up, but the same type of presence. And I think especially for the Islanders and what they need going forward, to me, that's exactly what the doctor ordered. You look at that defense, Noah Dobson's the only guy really that I mean can consistently move the puck, maybe besides Tony DeAngelo at points, I guess. But again, thinking long term, this team needs Schaefer bad. And I look at the center situation, and it's just not as much of a need, I think, for the Islanders. Sure, Misa could play wing if you want him to, but I think that would just be a waste of his talent. You got Cal Ritchie coming in as a top-tier center prospect. You also got Danny Nelson as well, who I think could be a solid bottom six piece. And then you got the core already there, and Bo Horvat and Jean-Gabriel Pageau. Horvat, I think, is the most likely to just be staying there long-term and shield these guys into things. But I think if Cal Ritchie is the first-line center for the foreseeable future now, that's okay. Plus, I think for the Islanders, there's a situation where they kind of go in a rebuild because of this first overall pick, really trying to prioritize the youth. And in next year's draft, it's looking pretty good so far. So they might be able to get another top six center there. Whereas a player like Matthew Schaefer, it's hard to come by somebody that brings so much potential to his game. So personally for me, even though I think Michael Misa would be my pick just because I think the center situation is such an important thing to nail down, and I ultimately believe Cal Ritchie would be better fit as just a solid offensive second line centerman behind Michael Misa. What the Islanders need, what they really crave long term, I think Matthew Schaefer fits all of those boxes, and to me is pretty much the perfect situation for them to be in. They needed a type of presence like Schaefer, and they have the opportunity to get that at first overall. Now, this is a situation that has been mentioned since the lottery was officially ended, and that's the possibility of the Islanders potentially trading back to still get a player like James Hagens, and then getting potentially more picks in this year's draft. Because for the Islanders, they do get their first overall pick, which is pretty good luck, but the rest of the draft, they just have their own picks and no extra selections. So they just have one pick in the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh round. If they do trade back, that could give them potentially a prospect, another big pick in the draft, potentially in the second round, and could give them a lot more options, which I think for the Islanders team is something I would look for. Now let's move on to the second round pick the Islanders have and that 42nd overall pick. And obviously this will greatly depend on what the Islanders do with that pick at first overall, whether they trade it, whether they select a defenseman or a centerman. But I want to go through the 5 guys here that I think can make the most sense for the Islanders and what their team needs are as well in that pool. Now, as you guys can already see, Sasha Bumin is one of the big ones here. And if the Islanders do trade down or they just select a center with that first overall pick, I think Bumin would be one of the most likely players to get selected by the Islanders. I mean, maybe they're in a position where they get an earlier second round pick or a later first, and Bumin I think could be pretty likely at that spot. I do think it would be a little bit rich to see him going to 42nd overall, even though I'm not the biggest fan of him. I just think for how many points he put up at the U18s, he's going to get selected in the first round, most likely. But if he is dropping, I think he'd be a pretty interesting selection by the Islanders. The skating ability and really the tools he has are just so fascinating. It reminds me a little bit of Philip Broberg in his draft year, where you could see the tools, you can see the talent, but putting it all together has been a bit of an issue. I think some of the decision making still leaves a lot to be desired, but for a team like the Islanders and give him some patience, he could be pretty interesting in that pool. Now, going on to another Swede who I think could be available at this spot for the Islanders, much more likely than Bumin, I would say, and Milton Gastrine, who was at this year's U18s, and I thought played pretty well in 7 games, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points for them. And I think in Gastrine's case, he's kind of like an amped up Danny Nelson, if you're looking for a comparison in that Islanders pool. Extremely sound hockey sense. He's somebody that plays with his teammates exceptionally soundly. Is somebody that just pushes the play up the ice in the right directions. I like the decision making. I love the security in his game. You know what you're getting. I don't know if he's quite second line center potential, but a mixture of that. Another center I see the Islanders potentially targeting is Cole McKinney, and this is somebody that I have really come to adore in this class. I think he's somebody that also could potentially fixture into the middle 6, but I think would be an astounding third line center. Of course, commit to University of Michigan. I think he is by far the most projectable player on this NTDP team this year, at least. He's something that I've absolutely adored. The points aren't blasting you away at the U18s, 5 points in 7 games, but what I just talked about with Milton Gastrine, put that tenfold with McKinney. The reliability, but also the forechecking, the speed, the intensity at which he plays the game. He's just such a perfect, I think, third line center for your team. The energy he's going to bring in all situations, especially on the penalty kill, on the power play. He's something that I think is just going to feast in all situations out there. And especially for the Islanders, a team that I think could use more intensity, use more speed, McKinney I think would be pretty fun. Now going on to a player we mentioned in the Montreal Canadiens target video, we go on to Shane Van Sage, and we mentioned in the target tickets for the Islanders, going for a big-time winger. I think Vansagi in the second round would be a perfect selection for the Islanders to make. Honestly, especially outside of the first round, he to me is one of the most, if not the most projectable player to go into the NHL. I absolutely see Vansagi making it to the NHL. It's just a question of how much does he push within the lineup. I think he'll at least be a really competent fourth line forward, somebody that will bang and crash, make big hits, big plays, and use the intensity he has to his advantage. There is some difficulties projection-wise with his skating, but I think it'll do just fine. I think the brain on him is just so special, and the way he plays the game, it's simple, but it works. And in Vansagi's case, that's something I think the Islanders will definitely appreciate and want to have on their roster. Now, moving on to that 74th pick for the Islanders and who they could target potentially in the third round, a big one to me would be Eddie Genborg, another bigger forward and somebody that, especially on the defensive side, is already pretty sound at his age, I would say. Big physical player, and he really shows it along the boards. He's able to get possession back very effectively. My big concern is the skating speed and how that projects for his scoring because it can be all over the place at times. But I think the talent for a defensive two-way bottom sixer is there. I think the Islanders, if they want to go for the physicality, could really appreciate that. One that I think would be really fascinating to see would be Simon Wang, who has been a huge story all throughout this year as one of the most raw players of the class, but somebody that earlier was maybe projected inside the first round. I don't see that quite happening anymore. He's come to the OHL, and the points aren't there, of course, just 2 points in 32 games in the regular season, but playing for BU apparently the next year, which will be another pretty big jump. In terms of the skating ability for somebody as big as he is, it's unbelievable. The way he's able to fly out there, the edge work is incredible. The decision-making leaves a lot to be desired, though. This is a long-term project, somebody that I don't even think would be NHL ready for at least another 5 years, but if you're looking for somebody that could potentially be maybe a good puck mover long-term, a good stopper maybe, there's a lot of ways you could take Simon Wang, but I think especially in the third round, it's a risk I think the Islanders could take. Another big risky player, but a big one as well, is Vaclav Nestrasil, who is one of the most interesting players in the USHL this year. 6'5", 190 pounds. He's somebody that puts up a decent amount of production, 42 points in 61 games for Muskegon this year, going for the University of Massachusetts as well. He's somebody that is a big boy, but is much more of a puck handler. He really loves to deke you out of your jock straps. He loves to make big plays in the neutral zone. He really loves to push play forward, and he's a really exciting player. There are times where I think the skating speed kind of limits his long-term upside, and the intensity is something I want to see a bit more out of him as the years go by, but he's another kind of third-round pick-ish type player that I think brings some interesting potential, and if he does pop, could be a fascinating player out there. But those are some of the players I think could make sense for the New York Islanders in this year's draft, and my take as well on the first overall pick. It's going to be a wild draft class for this Islanders team, but a transformative one for them. Not a lot of lottery luck over the past few years, but they have gotten some major luck today, and we'll see how that translates into the future. It's going to be a fascinating one, though, and I want to hear your thoughts down below for you guys. Who do you see the Islanders actually taking with that first overall pick? Is it Schaefer? Is it Hagens? Is it Misa? Is it Anton, Frondell, maybe? Let me know all your thoughts down below. Of course, if all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all of my hockey prospects talk right in one playlist. If you guys enjoyed as well, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for more draft content as we get closer to the draft this summer, and I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure you have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.